Take the £2 my mother gave you and be sensible, my stepbrother Arthur had sneered, leaving me to freeze and starve in the ruins of Blackwood Grange. Cast out at 20 with nothing but a cruel dismissal, he was absolutely certain he had discarded a helpless orphan to a worthless, cursed pile of stones. He had no idea my trembling, blistered hands were currently prying open a deliberately concealed door behind the manor's asymmetrical fireplace. And he certainly didn't know that the hidden stone study beyond it held a priceless, world-changing botanical legacy that would soon make me the savior of the entire county. Catherine Holloway stood on the cobbles outside her late father's house. The front door now closed to her forever. The £2 coins in her worn purse felt heavier than gold and colder than iron. They were the sum total of her inheritance, pressed into her palm by a stepmother whose eyes held no grief, only a brisk and final impatience. Her father, a man of quiet books and softer words, was gone. With him, it seemed, had gone Catherine's place in the world. She had mended her own black dress, a faint line of careful stitches visible at the cuff, a testament to a life of making do. Her face, framed by plain brown hair, pulled back severely, was pale with a fatigue that went deeper than sleeplessness. It was the weariness of a soul that has been told, in 1,000 silent ways, that it is in the way. The town of Marlow, with its tidy brick facades and curtained windows, seemed to watch her with a collective pitying stare. She was a problem to be solved, a loose thread in their neat tapestry. She turned from the door that was no longer home and began to walk with no destination in mind. The air was sharp with the smell of coal smoke and damp fallen leaves. Each step was an effort, a conscious act of placing one foot before the other, when every instinct told her to simply sit on the curb and let the grey dusk swallow her whole. It was then that a boy, a runner from the solicitor's office, skidded to a halt before her. He held out a sealed envelope. "Miss Catherine Holloway?" he asked, breathless. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She took the letter. Her name was written on the front in a precise, spidery hand. The solicitor was a Mr. Albright, a name she did not know. The message was brief, a summons to his office on 4th Street at his earliest convenience. A memory, faint as wood smoke, surfaced. Her father, years ago, mentioning a distant relation, a grandmother she'd never met, and some old family property long since sold or lost. He had waved a hand dismissively. "Nothing to concern yourself with, Kate. Dust and memories." Dread and a tiny, treacherous spark of hope warred within her. What could a solicitor want with her? More debts? More legal papers to sign away what little she didn't have? Yet it was a direction. It was a reason to keep walking. She clutched the letter, the sharp edges of the paper pressing into her palm. The town clock began to strike 4. Each chime a heavy, sonorous pronouncement of the fading day. She pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked toward 4th Street, her shadow long and solitary behind her. The weight in her purse felt like a judgment, but the letter in her hand felt like a question. And for the first time since the funeral, she felt the pull of an unanswered thing. Mr. Albright's office was a small, quiet room above a haberdashery, smelling of old paper, leather, and beeswax. The solicitor himself was a man whose age was difficult to guess, with kind, tired eyes behind spectacles, and a manner that was both gentle and precise. He gestured for Catherine to sit in the worn leather chair opposite his desk, which was a fortress of stacked ledgers and bundled documents tied with faded pink ribbon. He cleared his throat, not unkindly. "Miss Holloway," he began, his voice a dry rustle. "My condolences on the loss of your father. I knew him, not well, but I respected him." Catherine could only nod, the lump in her throat returning. She waited. Mr. Albright steepled his fingers. "I am the executor of an estate which, it seems, has lain dormant for some years. The estate of your paternal grandmother, Ilara Holloway." This was the name her father had mentioned, the one lost to dust and memories. "It appears," the solicitor continued, carefully untying a bundle of papers, "that she made a rather specific provision in her will, one that bypassed your father entirely and passed directly to you upon your coming of age or upon his death, whichever came later." He slid a heavy deed across the polished desk. The ink was faded, the parchment yellowed with age. "She left you her property, a small manor house and its surrounding acreage, a place known as Blackwood Grange." The name landed in the silent room with a thud. It sounded dark and unwelcoming. "A manor?" Catherine whispered, the words catching in her throat. The idea was so preposterous, so far beyond the realm of her 2-pound existence, that she felt a dizzying sense of unreality. Before Mr. Albright could reply, the door to the office opened without a knock, and a young man strode in, bringing a cold draught and an air of bullish confidence with him. It was her stepbrother, Arthur Finch. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his voice loud and dismissive. He barely glanced at the solicitor. His eyes, small and shrewd, were fixed on Catherine. "Chatting about the family fortune, are we?" He laughed, a short, unpleasant bark. "Don't tell me Albright has dredged up the old family curse." He leaned over the desk and squinted at the deed. "Blackwood Grange. Good Lord, that ruin is still standing. It's a pile of stones and rot, Catherine, worth less than the ground it sits on. And the ground is sour. You'll be paying taxes on a pile of rubble." Mr. Albright looked pained. "Mr. Finch, this is a private matter." "It's a family matter," Arthur retorted, straightening up. "And she's making a fool of herself. Take the £2 my mother gave you and be sensible. Don't saddle yourself with that. That folly." He spat the word out. "Holloway's folly." Catherine looked from her stepbrother's sneering face to Mr. Albright's patient one. She looked at the deed on the desk. Blackwood Grange, a pile of stones and rot. A folly. But it was hers. It was a name, a place, a direction. It was something other than the cold charity of Marlowe. She looked directly at Arthur, her voice quiet but steady. "I will take it," she said. What makes a person choose a ruin over the familiar? What hope can possibly live in a place everyone else has written off as worthless? Is it courage, desperation, or something else entirely? A quiet instinct that the most valuable things are often the most overlooked. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe for more stories of quiet triumphs. For Catherine, the decision was made, but the true nature of her inheritance was a secret the house itself was waiting to tell. The news of Catherine Holloway's inheritance spread through Marlowe like smoke on the wind. It was not a tale of fortune, but of foolishness. The townspeople, in the way of small communities, treated it as a piece of public theatre. Whispers followed her from the bakers to the drapers. She was the poor girl who had turned down a sensible, if meagre, handout for a haunted ruin. In the market square, as she spent a few of her precious shillings on dried beans and a slab of hard soap, Arthur found her again. He stood with his friends, his hands in his pockets, a smirk playing on his lips. "Well, well," he called out, loud enough for half the square to hear. "The lady of the manor. Going to live with the crows and the ivy, are we, Catherine?" His friends chuckled. Catherine kept her eyes on the shopkeeper's hands, paid her money, and turned to leave without a word. Her silence seemed to infuriate him more than any retort. "Don't come crying to us when the roof falls in on your head," he shouted after her. She did not look back. His mockery was a physical thing, a weight on her shoulders, but it also served to harden a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. She would not fail. She would not give him the satisfaction. That afternoon, as she packed her few belongings into a single, worn carpet bag, there was a quiet knock on her boarding room door. It was Thomas, the blacksmith's son, a friend from a childhood that felt a lifetime away. He was a broad-shouldered young man with a gentle face. His hands permanently stained with the soot of the forge. He held a canvas-wrapped bundle. "Heard you were leaving," he said, his voice low and kind. He didn't mention the Grange or the gossip. He just looked at her with honest concern. "It's a long road. I've a cart going out to the farrier near Crag Fell tomorrow. It's halfway there. You can ride with me that far." He pushed the bundle into her hands. Inside was a loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a small, sharp knife. It was more kindness than she had been shown in a month. "And," he added, hesitating for a moment, "Bramble, my old dog. He's no good at the forge anymore. Too old for the heat. He'd be good company for you. He's a quiet soul." The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Catherine met Thomas by the town gate. The cart was loaded, and sitting placidly on a pile of sacks was Bramble, a grey-muzzled dog of indeterminate breed with intelligent amber eyes. He thumped his tail once as Catherine approached. The journey began in silence. As the cart rumbled out of Marlow, leaving the familiar stone and slate behind, Catherine felt a profound sense of severance. She was truly on her own. A few miles out, where the hedgerows grew wild and the road became a muddy track, they passed an old woman methodically mending a dry stone wall. She wore a man's cap, and her face was a road map of wrinkles. As the cart drew level, she paused, resting her worn hands on a large stone. Her eyes, startlingly blue, fixed on Catherine. She did not smile, but her gaze was direct and heavy with meaning. "A house with good bones," the old woman said, her voice raspy like dry leaves, "waits for a steady hand." Then she turned back to her work, fitting the stone into place as if Catherine were already gone. The words made no sense, yet they settled in Catherine's mind, a strange and cryptic blessing she could not yet understand. The cart rumbled on, carrying her toward her folly. The final part of the journey was made on foot. Thomas had left her at a crossroads with a regretful look and a firm handshake, and for the last 5 miles it was just Catherine, her bag, and the old dog Bramble trotting faithfully at her heels. The weather, which had been bright, turned sullen. A low grey sky pressed down, and a persistent fine drizzle began to fall, soaking through her shawl and chilling her to the bone. The landscape grew wilder, the fields smaller, and hemmed in by ancient gnarled trees. The road dwindled to a pair of muddy ruts. Finally, as the light began to fail, she saw it. Through a stand of skeletal beeches, set on a low rise, was Blackwood Grange. It was worse than Arthur's mockery had painted it. It was not a house, it was a wound in the landscape. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken spine, slates missing in great patches. Most of the windows were boarded over. The few remaining panes of glass dark with grime or shattered. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, covered the front facade, its tendrils prying apart the mortar of the grey stone. The house seemed to be in the process of being slowly consumed by the wilderness around it. A profound silence hung over the place, broken only by the drip of water from the eaves and the mournful caw of a distant crow. Disappointment, cold and heavy, settled in Catherine's stomach. This was not a home. This was a tombstone. Bramble, sensing her despair, whined softly and pressed his flank against her leg. The front gate, wrought iron and rusted through, hung from a single hinge. The path to the front door was lost beneath a mat of weeds and moss. The door itself, heavy oak studded with iron, looked as if it hadn't been opened in a century. She had no key. She tried the great iron ring that served as a handle. It wouldn't budge. Exhausted, chilled, and utterly disheartened, Catherine slumped down on the top step, pulling her damp shawl around her. She had come all this way for this, for a locked ruin on a desolate hill. Tears she had refused to shed in Marlow now burned in her eyes. She would not cry. She would not. That night, she did not even try to enter the house. She found a marginally sheltered spot in the lee of a crumbling stable wall, shared her last piece of bread with Bramble, and huddled with the old dog for warmth, listening to the strange groans and sighs of the house as the wind moved through its broken frame. Her inheritance was not a house, but a presence, and it felt ancient, watchful, and deeply sad. The dawn came pull and watery, filtering through the mist that clung to the hollows. Catherine awoke, stiff and cold, Bramble a warm weight beside her. The house looked no less intimidating in the morning light. If anything, the daylight revealed the full extent of its decay. The crumbling mortar, the slick green moss on the north-facing walls, the unsettling lean of one of the great chimneys. But with the new day came a sliver of resolve. She had not come this far to be defeated by a locked door. She walked the perimeter of the house, her boots sinking into the soft, untended earth. Around the back, she found a low window into what must have been the kitchens. The boards covering it were rotten. Using the knife Thomas had given her, she pried at the sodden wood. It splintered and gave way with a groan of protest. She cleared the opening, hoisted her bag through, and then with Bramble whining encouragement from the ground, she scrambled inside, dropping onto a floor slick with damp and scattered with fallen plaster. The air was thick with the smell of decay, of wet stone, and something else, something like sleeping earth. She was in. Silence, deep and profound, filled the space. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light from the broken window. She moved slowly, cautiously, from the ruined kitchens into a long, dark corridor. Bramble padded silently behind her, his claws making soft, clicking sounds on the flagstones. Room by room, she unboarded the windows, prying away the nails with the back of her knife. Light, grey and hesitant, crept into the house, revealing the devastation within. Furniture was gone, stripped away years ago. Wallpaper peeled from the walls in long, curling strips like sunburnt skin. In every room, there was the same story of neglect and abandonment. And yet there was something else, a sense of solidity. The stone walls were immensely thick. The great oak beams overhead, though webbed with spiders, were solid and true. It was, she thought, remembering the old woman's words, a house with good bones. She came at last to the main hall, a large, two-story space with a vaulted ceiling. A grand staircase, its banister thick with dust, swept up one wall. But it was the fireplace that drew her eye. It was enormous, a cavern of soot-blackened stone, large enough to stand in. It dominated the room. She stood before it, looking up at the heavy stone mantel. And that's when she noticed it. A small detail, a thing that refused to fit. The fireplace was not centered on the wall. It was shifted a good 3 feet to the left, in a house of such evident, if faded, grandeur. A house built with an eye for symmetry and balance. This asymmetry was jarring. It was a deliberate flaw, an architectural dissonance that felt profoundly intentional. She paced it out, her steps echoing in the empty hall. 10 paces from the corner to the edge of the hearth. 16 paces from the other edge to the far corner. It was wrong. Her mind couldn't let it go. Why would a builder, a craftsman, create such a deliberate imbalance in the very heart of the home? The question hung in the dusty air, the first secret the house had offered up. Days turned into a week. Catherine's life found a new rhythm, one dictated by daylight and labor. She rose with the sun, her breath pluming in the cold air, and worked until her muscles ached, and dusk forced her to stop. Her first priority was to make a small section of the house habitable. She chose a room off the kitchen, one with a small, intact hearth and a window that faced south. She swept out the debris, scrubbed the flagstones with water hauled from a rusty pump in the yard, and patched the broken window pane with a piece of oiled canvas from her bag. It was a small pocket of order in a sea of chaos. At night, she would build a small fire, the flickering light pushing back the immense, watchful darkness of the grange. She and Bramble would huddle close, sharing the warmth, the silence of the great house wrapping around them. It was a lonely existence, but it was a life of her own making. Her hands, once soft, grew calloused and strong. She worked not with fury, but with a steady, patient deliberation. She was not conquering the house. She was tending to it, listening to it. Each day was a process of clearing and mending. She cleared the weeds from the path to the front door. She swept years of leaves and dirt from the floors. She scrubbed grime from the windows, letting more and more light into the forgotten corners. Bramble was her constant shadow, a silent companion whose presence was a comfort. He would lie in a patch of sun while she worked, his slow, rhythmic breathing a counterpoint to the scrape of her broom or the creak of a stubborn shutter. As she worked, her mind kept returning to the off-center fireplace in the main hall. It was a puzzle that nagged at her. One afternoon, determined to understand it, she began to clean it. The stone was coated in a thick, greasy layer of soot. Using a bucket of water and a stiff brush she'd found in the stables, she began to scrub. It was hard, filthy work. The soot stained her hands and face, and the cold water numbed her fingers. But as the layers of black grime began to dissolve, the true character of the stone was revealed. It was a beautiful, pale grey stone, veined with darker lines. And on the mantelpiece, almost invisible until now, were carvings. They were not the usual heraldic shields or decorative flourishes she might have expected. They were delicate, precise engravings of plants, a curling fern frond, the bell-shaped flower of a foxglove, the intricate seed head of a poppy. Each one was rendered with an artist's eye for detail. Her father had taught her a little of botany on their country walks. She recognized some, but others were strange, unfamiliar. Then, as she scrubbed at the stone lintel above the firebox, her brush snagged on something. A section of mortar between two of the massive stones was different. It was softer, more friable than the rock-hard mortar elsewhere. She picked at it with a fingernail. It crumbled into dust. She remembered a long-ago lesson from her father, watching a mason repair their garden wall. He had explained the difference between old lime mortar and newer cement. This was different. It didn't belong. Her hands were learning what her mind had not yet pieced together. The strange carvings, the misplaced fireplace, the crumbling mortar. They were not accidents. They were clues, a trail left for someone to find. The discovery of the soft mortar became an obsession. Catherine could think of nothing else. It was the loose thread she had been searching for. The next morning, she returned to the great hall, not with a brush and bucket, but with the small, sharp knife Thomas had given her, and a hammer she had found. Its head rusted, but its handle solid, in the abandoned stables. Bramble sat at a distance, watching her with his wise, old eyes, as if he understood that something significant was about to happen. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a mixture of fear and exhilarating hope. She felt like a trespasser in her own home, about to violate a long-kept secret. Carefully, she began to chip away at the strange mortar. It gave way easily, falling in a shower of grey dust onto the hearthstones. It was just as she suspected. It was a newer, weaker mix, designed to look like the old but not to last. Behind it, she did not find more stone. Her knife scraped against wood. Her breath caught in her throat. She worked faster now, with her movements sure and precise, chipping away the remaining mortar to reveal the outline of a low, narrow door, cunningly set into the stonework of the fireplace's vast chimney breast. It was masterfully concealed. The grain of the wood darkened and scored to mimic the surrounding stone. There was no handle, no knob, only a small, almost invisible hole where a key might go. But the wood around the edges was soft with age. Using the blade of her knife and then the claw of the hammer, she began to pry it open. The wood groaned, the sound impossibly loud in the silent hall. Splinters flew. With a final shuddering crack, the lock gave way, and the door swung inward into absolute blackness. A gust of cool, still air, smelling of dry paper and sealed spaces, washed over her. It was a smell not of damp and decay, but of preservation. She stood at the threshold, peering into the dark. It was a passage, a hidden way. Taking a tallow candle she had bought in Marlow and a box of precious lucifers, she lit the wick. The small flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the stone. Shielding it with her hand, she took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold, Bramble pressing close behind her. The door led to a narrow spiral staircase, its stone steps worn smooth in the center, descending into the earth beneath the house. Down she went, the candlelight revealing walls of perfectly fitted dry stone. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a room. It was not a cellar or a dungeon. It was a study, a dry, stone-lined chamber, furnished with a simple wooden desk, a chair, and floor-to-ceiling shelves. And on the desk, Illuminated by the golden glow of her candle lay a collection of leather-bound journals. The storm broke on a Tuesday. It was not a summer squall, but a relentless, week-long deluge of the kind that turns the world to a uniform grey. The wind howled around the corners of the grange, rattling the window frames and driving the rain against the stone in horizontal sheets. For Catherine, the storm was both a prison and a sanctuary. Trapped inside, she devoted every waking moment to the secret room and the legacy of Alora Holloway. The journals, written in a fine, elegant script, were a revelation. Alora was not just her great-grandmother. She was a brilliant, self-taught botanist, architect, and engineer. Blackwood Grange had been her life's work, a house she designed and built not for show, but as a living laboratory. The off-center fireplace was a deliberate design, a key to her hidden world. The journals were filled with exquisite drawings of plants, notes on their medicinal properties, and detailed plans for the estate. The most important of these plans was for a walled garden, hidden behind the crumbling north wall of the property. A place Alora had called her physic garden. It was there she cultivated rare and potent herbs, some brought from overseas, others bred herself. As the storm raged outside, a different kind of storm was brewing in the nearby village of Oak Shallow. The relentless damp and cold had brought with it a sickness, a fever that settled deep in the chest, leaving its victims weak and breathless. The village doctor was run off his feet, his remedies of little use against the persistent ailment. Word of the sickness reached Catherine through a travelling tinker who sought shelter from the rain in her stable. He spoke of families laid low, of children with fevers that would not break. As he spoke, Catherine's eyes fell upon a drawing in one of Alora's journals, a plant with delicate star-shaped blue flowers, identified as Pulmonaria officinalis, or lungwort. Beside the drawing, Elara had written, "For the affliction of the lungs, a decoction of the leaf brings ease to the breath and cools the blood." The journal contained dozens of such entries. Catherine knew what she had to do. The moment the rain eased, she pulled on her sturdiest boots and went in search of the walled garden. She found it just where the plans indicated. A forgotten acre, enclosed by a high stone wall, so overgrown with brambles and ivy, it was nearly impassable. She worked tirelessly, her hands raw and bleeding, clearing the entrance. Inside, shielded by the walls, a miracle had survived. Choked by weeds but still alive, were the remnants of Elara's garden. She recognized the distinctive spotted leaves of the lungwort immediately. That night, a knock came at her door. It was a man from the village, his face etched with panic. His wife and young son were sick, and he had heard a rumor, a whisper from the tinker, that the strange woman at the grange might have some knowledge of herbs. He was desperate. Catherine brought them in, sheltering them in her small, warm room. She spent the night brewing a tea from the lungwort leaves, just as Elara's journal instructed. She spooned the warm liquid into the feverish child, whose breathing was shallow and ragged. By morning, his fever had broken. He was sleeping peacefully, his breath coming slow and even for the first time in days. She had chosen. She had committed not just to the house, but to the knowledge it held. The recovery of the farmer's son was not a miracle, but it was treated as one. The story spread through Oak Shallow faster than the fever had. At first, the villagers were hesitant, suspicious of the quiet woman in the derelict manor. But desperation is a powerful motivator. One by one, then in small groups, they began to make the journey up the muddy track to Blackwood Grange. They did not come demanding cures, but asking for help, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. Catherine, guided by the wisdom in Alora's journals, met them with quiet compassion. She showed them how to identify the herbs in the walled garden, how to prepare the infusions and poultices. She never claimed any special power. She simply shared the knowledge that the house had given her. The village vicar, Mr. Ashworth, a kind and thoughtful man, came to see for himself. He walked with Catherine through the newly cleared paths of the physics garden, listening as she explained the properties of each plant, quoting from her great-grandmother's journals. He looked at the detailed drawings, at the precise script. "This is remarkable," he murmured, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "Alora Holloway. I remember her name from the parish records. She was considered an eccentric." He looked at Catherine, at her steady hands and her calm, serious face. "She was a woman ahead of her time, and you, my dear, have given her a voice again." News of the miracle at the Grange eventually reached Marlow. Mr. Albright, the solicitor, made the long journey himself, accompanied by a distinguished-looking gentleman from a botanical society in London. The gentleman, a renowned professor, examined the plants in the garden and the journals in the study with mounting excitement. "Extraordinary," he kept saying. "Some of these cultivars were thought to be lost entirely. This collection is of national importance." Catherine's inheritance was not a pile of stones and rot. It was a living library of priceless knowledge. The final visitor came alone one crisp autumn afternoon. Catherine was staking a climbing rose against the garden wall when she saw Arthur Finch standing at the gate. He looked thinner, his expensive coat now slightly too large for him. His speculative ventures, she had heard, had failed. He did not enter the garden, but stood watching as a group of village women left, their baskets filled with herbs, calling out their thanks to Catherine. He saw the restored roof of the Grange, the clear glass in the windows, the tidy paths. He saw the respect in the villagers' eyes. He looked at his stepsister, no longer a pale, defeated girl, but a woman of purpose, her hands stained with earth, her expression calm and self-possessed. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. There was nothing to say. He simply turned, his shoulders slumped, and walked back down the path, humbled not by a confrontation, but by the quiet, undeniable evidence of a value he had been utterly blind to. A year passed, the seasons turned, and Blackwood Grange settled into a new life. It was not a grand house, not a place of balls and polished silver. It was something far better. It was a place of purpose. The roof was mended, the windows glazed, the rooms clean and filled with the scent of drying herbs and wood smoke. The physic garden, once a forgotten ruin, was now a thriving, meticulously ordered space, its bounty shared freely with the surrounding villages. Catherine Holloway was no longer the dismissed orphan of Marlow. She was the guardian of the Grange, a respected figure whose quiet wisdom was sought after, and whose steady hands had brought healing and hope to the community. Her name was spoken not with pity, but with a deep and abiding reverence. She had found her place, not by inheriting a fortune, but by uncovering a legacy. One evening in late summer, as the sun dipped below the rolling hills, casting a long, golden light across the landscape, she stood by the old stone wall of the garden. The air was still and warm, filled with the hum of bees and the sweet fragrance of lavender and chamomile. Bramble, now greyer and slower, rested his head on her knee, his tail giving a soft, contented thump against the stone. Mr. Ashworth, the vicar, had walked up from the village to share a cup of mint tea with her. He gazed out at the house, its grey stone glowing in the twilight. "You have rebuilt your inheritance, Catherine," he said, his voice gentle. "You have made this place whole again." Catherine looked from the thriving garden to the solid, peaceful house. She thought of the insulting £2, of Arthur's mocking laughter, of the world that had seen only a worthless girl and a derelict ruin. They had looked, but they had not seen. She placed a hand on Bramble's loyal head and replied, her voice barely more than a whisper, yet carrying the entire weight of her journey. "It wasn't the house that was empty," she said. "It was the world that had forgotten how to look." Thank you for staying with us to the end of Catherine's story. It's a quiet reminder that true value often lies hidden, waiting for a patient hand and a willing heart to uncover it. If you were moved by her journey of finding worth in what was discarded, please consider leaving a like and a comment below. Be sure to subscribe for more tales of resilience and unexpected discovery. We'll have another story for you soon.